Bill Cammack here. Today we're talking with Matthew Weiss. How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Excellent. Everything's good. How would you classify yourself these days? Engineer, mixer, producer?
I would classify myself as an engineer.
Okay, so you're working on a tutorial series about mixing rap vocals. What's going on with that?
Yeah, I have a couple of articles out floating around on the internet that are about how to mix rap vocals, and
Okay.
I mix a lot of stuff, but I guess I have a pretty strong reputation for mixing rap. So I figured, why not make a tutorial series? It's something that people want, and it's something that people can use, and it's a good extra source of cash for me. So everything adds up.
Excellent.
The tutorial series is basically going to be a very straightforward approach. It's not going to be anything complicated. It's just if you're a rapper or a producer or an engineer who's just starting out and you want to make the rap vocals sound really good, I'm just going to provide 4 basic easy steps to do it. And I mean, I say easy with quotes around it. You have
Sure.
to have Right, you got to have the ear to know what to do, but the fact is that you actually don't have to do much, and I think people could benefit from that.
Agreed. What do you feel generally is the biggest mistake people make when they record rap vocals?
I would say that's maybe twofold. I think the biggest mistake is not paying enough attention to your delivery, and that I do cover that. Actually, I have an interview with a vocal coach as one of the sections of the tutorial, where she explains a lot of techniques for, getting the best out of your diaphragm and your breath control and everything like that. I think the other mistake that people make a lot is not care of the room. A lot of people seem to feel, and still seem to feel, that recording in a closet is like a good idea, or just recording in a room with no kind of sound insulation at all. And so, when I hear vocals like that, that's always very difficult to work with. They just put the microphone in the room, and they don't really treat the space at all, and it ends up not sounding even as good as the microphone could potentially sound, simply because the room is reacting with the voice in an unpleasing way.
A lot of people seem to have issues with mixing rap vocals into a pre-recorded 2-track. You have any opinions on that?
I've got issues with that. That's tough. Rap can get deceptively tough for people who are getting into the beginning of it, because the entry-level guys end up with the budget equipment and the least professionally treated space, and then they end up with the beats that are mixed by people who don't know how to really mix, and are MP3s that are already hyper-compressed. And so basically you're starting with like the toughest stuff. And so, when you're a beginner, that's like advanced engineering is what you need for that kind of stuff. You need to have that kind of experience to deal with that. And meanwhile, these guys, they just want to rap. They're not trying to be mix engineers. So there's a lot of techniques. I have an article in the Pro Audio Files on some techniques for dealing with mixing rap to a 2-track beat. But the main thing is that you have to open the beat up first. You have to create some kind of a space without destroying the track, so that the vocals can actually breathe, and then you've got to get the vocal to sound kind of like it belongs in the track, and that's sort of it's complicated.
So with this tutorial series you're working on, is there a basic approach you're following, and if so, why do you feel like that would be helpful to the people who are trying to learn?
There is. My philosophy on it is to teach the thought process, not just the technique. And the technique is extremely valuable, but the thought process is a lot more valuable. That teach a man to fish thing.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do is I through the video, I show you what I do with a rap vocal and with the track in the background, and explain why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I show you how I do it. And then there's a second section after all of that where I just go through with a vocal that I haven't really done anything on, and I just explain what I'm thinking as I'm hearing it. And I use the same thought process that I show in the first section of the tutorial,
Okay.
but I do things differently because it's a different vocal. And I think by doing both of those things, I'm communicating the thought, the idea, which is more than just the numbers.
Yeah, I think that's going to be pretty important, because a lot of times you'll see people ask questions about oh, which plugin should I use, and do you have any presets for that plugin that are good for this and that? And I think they're skipping exactly what you're talking about, which is the actual thought process. What are you really trying to do?
Sure. I mean, it's a logical conclusion. You think, okay, well, there's a way. People sort of make it seem like there's a way that I do things, and a lot of times the guests on the Pensado show or whatever, they with the batter's box and stuff, they're like, oh, I do this, and it's like, well, a lot of times you do that, but you always do little variations of it, and sometimes it doesn't even work at all. So it's not really that simple. And yeah, I mean, and the other thing too is that in the second one, in the first one, I'm showing what I do using the plugins that I like. And in the second one, I'm just going to use the stock DigiDesign things, and not even the new ones, the older stock DigiDesign ones, just to show that, like, you know, it's not the best plugins out there, but it's more about what you do with them than the actual quality, you know?
Nice. And how did you develop your particular style?
Trial and error. Getting it wrong a lot and getting it right by the good graces of God every now and then, and eventually remembering what I was thinking while I was doing it. But I've had some guidance along the way. Denise Barberia has been a huge influence on me, and a producer named Mark Marshall has been a huge influence as well. And so I can't say that I've done it on my own, for sure.
You mentioned trial and error. What do you think it takes for people to grow as engineers?
Well, people tend to say there's this sort of 10,000 hour rule.
Yeah.
and it's true, because it's experience. The fact is when you're working on a record, whether you're tracking or mixing or mastering or whatever you're doing, every time you get something, there's going to be nuance. There's going to be something different that you haven't dealt with, or that you hasn't been in the same context. And so you need to just keep doing it, because, you know, if you, by dividing your context and your understanding, it increases the sum of everything. So let me rephrase that in a way that makes sense. If I'm working on a rock tune and I'm processing distorted guitars and trying to make the drums feel heavy through distorted guitars, I might, through trial and error, develop certain techniques. If I then switch over to an EDM track that has a very heavy synthesizer, a buzzy saw synth as the lead, that's not entirely different than a distorted guitar. And so I might use a little bit of what I figured out from the rock track in the EDM track to create my own results that work. And it'll be different, and it'll be its own variation, but it's what helps to form my approach and my own success and experience toward it.
Cool. And what do you think about the difference between being unique and following certain conventions? People are always saying, oh, you should do this, you should do that, but if you listen to and read content from successful mixers, a lot of times they're talking about things that they did which are unique and not necessarily following the beaten path.
Well, sometimes they're talking about that just to talk about it.
That too.
Here's how music works. In order to make something great, you have to make something exceptional. In order to make something exceptional, you have to make something that is an exception. That is the actual definition of the meaning of the word. Now, the question is, who's got the guts? Most of the time, I've got the guts, because I don't subscribe to conventions. However, a lot of times artists are very much preoccupied with the idea of, I want to sound like this person, or I want to sound like this person. And I think a lot of engineers get preoccupied with that idea as well. They hear this sort of normative sound, an approximate ethereal kind of idea, but they sort of know, okay, things tend to sound like this. And so they get into that normative mode of thinking. But if you have a little bit of guts, you start separating the idea of sound and convention and feeling and music, and you realize those are all different things. And, you know, the people who really make it are the ones, the artists, who give me or whoever their engineer is the permission to say, make this feel great. Or they say, I know this will feel great because this is my vision, and I know that it might not be the same, or it might be too much the same like something else, but I'm going to do it anyway because I know that it works.
Do you feel like it's important or maybe beneficial for mixers to also be artists?
Hmm. Yes, I do. I think that a mixing engineer's job is not really about sound. Sound is the medium, but the job is somebody's handing you a piece of music, and you have to facilitate that music to translate the way it's intended to translate. If you don't really understand music, it's going to be really difficult to understand intention. Not to say that you have to, but if you're making your own music, if you're writing your own music, if you play an instrument, those things really do help. They broaden your scopic understanding of what's going on in the music itself.
What do you think about career goals? I find that a lot of the time people seem to be trying to pattern themselves off of people they already see that are considered to be successful, as opposed to being themselves, doing their own style, and presenting something unique to the community.
I think there has to be a degree of both, actually. In terms of advancing one's career, especially in such a ambiguous world like music or film, where it's art, having people that you can look up to who have patterned their career a certain way and learning from them and seeing the steps that they took, I think that's important and shouldn't be dismissed. But at the same time, times constantly change. We are in a completely different world. I stepped into this business when studios were the main hub for music creation. And it was the very end of that, but it was there. And that's a completely different paradigm than today. Today, it's all people are making their music everywhere. They're making their music on laptops, on airplanes. Like, that idea was inconceivable 15 years ago.
Absolutely.
So when the time's constantly changing, you can't necessarily look to somebody who's already done it and say that's got to be right. I don't mean to keep going back to my own stuff with the pro audio files, but I wrote a really important article that I think a lot of people haven't quite read yet because it's not as exciting as like how to use a compressor, but it's an article on career goals and developing your career.
Okay, good. I didn't even know that.
Well, a lot of people don't. It didn't get passed around as much as some of the other articles, but if you're a serious producer or engineer, I basically laid out how I do it, how I make this my full-time job, and how I've been doing that for years. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's the goal that a lot of people are trying to get to, inevitably. So, I really hope people do read that one because I think it's important.
Very cool. We'll link to it. What you're talking about is kind of what I was bringing up because I don't know that a lot of people are thinking about a viable career path. I feel like they think that you make some so-called beats and you sell them and then you latch on to some up-and-coming rapper and then you become the boutique DJ behind this rap sensation, and then you just hang around in limos and pop champagne and all that. And I haven't seen that as reality in most of the stories of mixers that I've heard of. Do you have any opinions on that?
That's not even the reality for most of the rappers.
That too.
That's, it doesn't work like that. It when it does work like that, here's the reason people think it works like that. When it does work like that, it's newsworthy. It becomes exceptional, and so people make a news story out of it. You don't hear the news stories about the stuff where people go the regular route, but that's 90% of the time where people go the regular route. If you're a producer, you have to understand that your revenue stream cannot solely be based on producing for one person or just simply making beats. I mean, it can, but that's not a plan that has longevity to it. It's a good plan, but you need to look at things more holistically. It's good to do that, but remember that what happens when that rapper's buzz fades away? What happens when your record contract is negotiated poorly? What happens when the music of the day changes and it's no longer the same? How long do you want to be in those limousines for? 4 years?
Right. And then nothing.
And then what? And then back to Burger King?
Right.
It's not, it's a good plan, but it needs more.
And along those lines, what do you think about a mixer's skills being genre specific versus being what I would call universal?
That's a really good question. That's a question that I will answer it differently depending on what year you ask me.
Uh-huh.
For a long time, I sort of felt like sound is sound, music is music, and you either get it or you don't, and so you mix it. And if you can mix one thing, you can mix something else. And then I sort of started realizing that, it's not really the same. You have to understand that what makes a mix good is extremely subjective and actually is really pretty much based on the culture surrounding that music. And if you don't understand that culture, you don't know how to mix the music. It doesn't matter how good you are with sound. I don't care how strong you can make your drums knock or how soft you can make them whisper. If you don't know when to do one and when to do the other, it's not going to help you. So, I got a little pigeonholed in the rap thing because I was doing a lot of it, and so therefore I was doing more of it. And then I started branching out and doing more rock projects and jazz projects and electronica stuff, and I realized that, I was swinging and missing a lot when I was first getting into it. So it is different. You have to put yourself, you have to listen to the music that you're mixing in order to get where it's coming from.
As far as your rap vocals tutorial, what are your opinions on delays versus reverb?
It depends on how you're using it. Now, in fairness, confession, I actually do prefer delays on rap vocals most of the time because you can mix them in a way where they don't get in the way of things and they don't sync the vocals back. But in the tutorial that I use, I show you a delay and I show you a reverb, and in the context of the song itself, the reverb wins out, and that's the one that actually makes it to the record, and that's the one that is going to be put out on whatever. I don't know what their distribution is, but it's not about reverb versus delay. It's about the song. It's about the feeling of the song.
One of the things that was interesting to me about reverb on vocals, not necessarily rap vocals, was when I found out about the idea of making the reverb, maybe it's a small reverb like a tiled room or something, and then adding it to the vocal, but then turning it back down until you can't actually hear the reverb, but you can feel it if you mute it and unmute it. Is that something that you use?
That's my general equation. I call it ambience more than I call it reverb, but I do that on rap a lot, and I'll actually, it can be really useful if the vocal is deficient in something. You can enhance that in the ambience, and it will imbue itself onto the dry vocal. It's sort of a cool little effect. But if your vocal is too bright, for example, and so you have to de-ess it a lot in order to get it to be listenable, and you can't really put any more highs in because it keeps getting sharp to you. You can excite or put high end into your reverb, into your ambience, and suddenly your vocal has that effect of being more trebolacious. That's a word now.
Okay. One of the things I like to do with harmony vocals is use Haas effect, give them a little bit of delay from left to right, and to me that sounds like it makes the harmony vocal step out from behind the lead vocal, so they're not exactly both down the middle. Do you use panning a lot, or are you an LCR type, left, center, right, for people that know what I'm talking about? Are you an LCR type of mixer?
I'm adamantly opposed to left, center, right. Not because I feel that it's bad, but because anytime you're prescribing an approach to your mix before you actually start conceiving the idea of the mix, you've already set yourself off on a bad course. Mm-hmm. I feel
you've limited yourself. Yeah.
And a lot of LCR guys, in fairness, actually use partial pan positions, and I think that's good. You want to stay open to that thing. It's something you have to your ability. You just have, the reason LCR kind of works, or works well at times, is because the left, the center, and the right are the most strong positions. They're the ones that our ears can locate the best. Going on to the harmony vocals, my preference is that there's enough doubles of the vocals where I can actually legitimately organically pan them, so that when they fold back into mono, they do not comb filter. Preferably. That said, it doesn't always happen. So yeah, using some kind of a stereo effect like the Haas effect is a good way to do it. Something I've been experimenting with recently has been using phase-based panning, which is kind of like the Haas effect, using sample-based time delays where you're delaying one side by 50 samples as opposed to like 10 milliseconds. It's much, much, much shorter in that. And so the idea is kind of like your head is about maybe a foot. So that roughly translates to a millisecond of sound delay from one side of your head to the other. So anything under a millisecond is almost like it's getting to this ear a little before it's getting to that ear. And so you get that phase-based panning effect. A little complicated, but, maybe some food for thought for the guys who know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it is actually. What I should have said is that when I do what I'm calling the Haas effect, I use Logic's sample delay, and I delay it between 4 and 7 samples, just like you're saying. And it's just that much, to me, makes it step out, like kind of look around from behind, like a person in a crowd, as opposed to, but what you're saying is, if you're using, a few milliseconds or what have you, it can create comb filtering when it's summing to mono. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, anytime you're making a delay of any sort, you're going to get comb filtering. And actually, if you're doing sample delays, when it folds in, you're going to get a tonal shift more than you're going to get comb filtering. It's almost an EQ, almost, not quite. But yes, anytime you're taking something that's inherently mono and making it stereo, you're doing it by basically making it disagree with its own mono-ness. So when it does fold back into mono, it's going to have weird effects.
Outside of the box, inside of the box, or hybrid?
I prefer to mix on a digital or a hybrid system, not because I don't think that mixing out of the box is fantastic. I love it, but one of the great things about digital that we all have forgotten while admiring the spectacular sound of analog is that digital is really freaking convenient. The
workflow, recallability.
Right, the recallability, the fact that you have as many plugin instances as you want, all that stuff that Michael Brower has up on his website about his complex group routing and things like that. The reason why that's so brilliant and why Michael Brower is who he is because he is able to get more out of his limitations than anybody else can. His group effects maximize the gear he has available and the number of channels he has available in a really, really useful and cool way. But when you're digital, you don't need to do that stuff. I'm not as smart as he is, so I don't have to be.
Right, we have extra stuff now that we can use.
Right.
I don't do a lot of 2-bus compression right now. I do most of my compression on submix buses. So on a 2-bus, I might have a 2-to-1 ratio compressor doing maybe 2 to 3 dB of reduction. You have any opinions on 2-bus processing?
I've got opinions on that and also what you just said.
Oh, enlighten us.
So going to the idea of my video and dealing with thought process, you want to avoid thinking about things in terms of I'm using 2-to-1 ratio on the bus compressor with maybe 2 or 3 decibels of gain reduction. The problem with that thought process is that it really is very dependent on the compressor you're using. You will find if you pull up an SSL compressor, the master bus on like a Duality or a G series, if you set it to 2-to-1, you might find yourself doing a lot more compression than if you set it to 4-to-1. So if I'm using an SSL compressor, I'm starting off at 4-to-1 because it actually sounds more transparent. And if it's for a mix that requires a punchy sound, I find the way it reacts to the attack gives it more punch than the 2-to-1. So it's less compressed at a higher ratio. And you need to be aware of those kinds of things anytime you're making settings. Certain compressors you can nail like 5 decibels of gain reduction on the compressor and it sounds good. And others, you barely touch the thing and you're like, whoa, where did all my transients go? They are gone. It's really case dependent. Now, stereo processing.
Well, before you get to that, I agree with you on the SSL because it seems like, even though they don't tell you this, it seems like the 2-to-1 is a softer knee than the 4-to-1. So what you're saying makes sense. It actually starts compressing earlier. So in order to get that 2 dB, you're actually compressing a lot more of it.
That is correct, sir. You have hit the nail on the head.
Ding, 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 our survey says. But go ahead. What you were going to say?
Yeah, well, that gets to one of my favorite toppings, which is toppings. One of my favorite topics.
Sprinkles. Sprinkles.
Sprinkles. It gets to one of my favorite sprinkles, which is technicality versus creativity. But before we jump into any of that stuff, bus processing. So when I have my druthers, somebody else is handling the mastering, and I send off a reference master. My reference master usually does have some kind of compression on it. That's not because I necessarily think that it sounds the best. It's because oftentimes the request or the expectation is for the record to be very loud.
Okay.
And so, using compression on the 2-bus can also help that happen. And in a different way than when you use it on the subgroups or when you use it on individual tracks. So a lot of times I will put a little bit of compression on there. And I have a particular compressor that I had modded to work in a really optimal way for my process. So I tend to use that. And also it's a tube compressor, and I just like the way it sounds. Like sometimes I'll just throw through it without doing any kind of gain reduction just because I like it. But I mean, if I have to do the mastering, I'll be doing that. If somebody else can do it, then more power to them. I've just, my reference is there to set a bar, but by all means, whatever they want to put on the 2-bus, my mix is good before it gets to the 2. That's my feeling.
Any opinions on EDM, side chaining, and or submixing?
Yeah, I don't side chain anything, almost ever. And I know that sounds weird, but I do it with volume automation. And the reason I do that is because when you watch the Dave Get a Masterclass video, because he sort of explains it really well. When you're using a compressor, you're reacting to the kick, which means however the kick is defined, that's how your sidechain is defined. On top of that, it's reacting. Reaction means that it's happening after the fact, even if it's a little bit. And the leading edge of the kick drum is only 10 to 30 milliseconds long. And really, it's that first couple of milliseconds are the highest tones, too. So my feeling is I don't necessarily want something to react to the kick. I want it already ducked out of the way before the kick hits. And on top of that, I also want a release curve that works where it sort of supports the underside of the kick, like the lower part of the sustain. It shouldn't be like kick and then everything else. It's kick, and as the kick gets to a certain point, then everything else grows, and that keeps it glued together. Because if it's too up and down, you get this weird disconnection between everything, and it's like kick everything, kick everything, kick everything. Which can be cool sometimes, but I find it annoying most of the time.
So when you're talking about manual automation, you're saying you're drawing with a Wacom tablet?
Yeah, I will use the Pro Tools volume automation, although from a thread on the Pensado student thing, I started looking into that Cable Guy's volume shaper, and
Looks
I
good,
bought
right?
it.
Oh, you got it. Okay.
It's really cool. After all of that whole me saying, like, volume automation, I'm going to buy this. Yeah, I mean, but the way I was doing it prior to, like, 2 days ago was drawing it in manually and copying and pasting, and what I liked about that is that I could make, instead of it going boo whoop boo whoop boo whoop boo whoop, I could do boo whoop boo whoop boo whoop boo whoop boo whoop, like,
Yeah, I saw something like that. Like you were saying on the 2 and the 4, you were doing different curves.
Yeah. The cool thing about EDM sidechaining is that the release pulls you into the next beat. That's the movement of the record. It's a reverse movement to a lot of styles of like rock and things like that, where it's the decay that moves you into the next. So if you, on the 4 beat, where it's about to turn around back to the first measure again, or back to the downbeat, if you have more of that pull, it forces the listener to stay with the record and to groove a little more, because you don't ever get too comfortable with it doesn't become hypnotic or monotonous. It keeps you moving because it's changing.
So you wrote and produced a song called Feel Real that was selected for use in the most recent Indaba Pensados Plays competition. What was that entire experience like?
All right. Well, the inspiration for it came as a part of a 5-song EP that I concocted with my friend Vince, and the idea was what is music going to be about in the future? That was our premise, and so this is the song that I predominantly worked on my own. This was sort of my own little mind baby, and I wrote it about an online dating site that had artificial personalities built into it, and through a glitch in the system, the personalities find each other, and they're programmed to keep on each other and connect with each other to keep them spending more money, but they're programs that are doing it to each other now. So, you know, they keep falling in love with each other, but because they can't ever be real, they have to break it off. But again, it's an algorithm, so they just keep falling back in love again, and it's an endless cycle where, you know, by the end of it, they almost feel real, but they're not. So that's actually what that song is about.
That's very Blade Runner right there.
Yeah, well, I'm a nerd.
Very science fiction. No, it's cool. I like it. It's very science fiction.
The whole project was a very science fiction project, but what I didn't want to do was I didn't want to make it too science fiction-y sounding. I wanted to make it really organic sounding. Sure. I wanted to do the opposite of what you would think the future would sound like, because I see that interpretation of the future is a little dystopic, and I wanted something that was more human. So that was that, and the experience of actually recording and mixing it was great. I was working with people that I care about, musicians that I've worked with for a long time that I really, you know, I love them dearly. They're great friends, and, you know, and exceptional talents. And I worked with an engineer named Benny, who's just so far beyond his years and his talent, where it was like when he recorded that, he was 27 when we did that. So he was younger than I am now. And his mixing was phenomenal. He did each record in like 5 hours a record and just nailed it every time. So yeah, it was a great experience. And then to have everybody appreciate the song so much 4 years after the fact and love it so much in a competition where actually a lot of the entries were really good. Like, there was a lot of great entries. There weren't as many entries as other competitions, but the quality of each entry was really pretty phenomenal. So to be picked as the one, I almost can't say like this. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't be picked as the best one, because how do you choose a song as the best? But to even be considered amongst that ranking, it was like, I had actually commented saying, I kind of hope I don't win this, because there was another record there that I wanted to mix.
Right.
Yeah. And then, you know, having everybody mix my stuff, and some of the people did really, really good jobs. That was a great experience, and it was cool to hear people do different interpretations, even the Far Out stuff, where it was kind of like, sure, okay, this is totally inappropriate song.
Like, lay off the filters, dude. Lay off the filters.
Right. Where it's like, whoa, this. But it was cool to hear it in that context, because I never thought to do it that way, and I usually didn't like it, but I still appreciated it.
Yeah, and you get something out of it, and you can even learn something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if you learn what you don't want to do.
But that's important too.
It is.
So, you know, but I think if I learned anything, I got to see things from the producer's perspective again, and it's been a while since that. I've really been engineering pretty exclusively and not producing as much over the last number of years. So to hear so many people mix the record as the producer, I that light where it was like, oh, when you mix the record, you don't have to go crazy. You know, dudes like Crisis BX, for example, he popped out to me because Crisis is not a mix engineer.
No, he's not.
No offense to him, but he's not really a mix engineer. He makes rap beats, and he's great at that, but he's not a mix engineer, and all he did was respected the music and just do what he thought was best, and it was a standout mix.
No.
Yeah. So, and I mean, there were a lot of people like that who just basically respected the music, Phil Phillips on the forum, didn't do anything crazy, just did a great mix. It stood out to me. Leo, I always screw up his last name. Leo GF. He got a little crazy on the intro stuff because he wanted to switch it up, but for the most part, he was really just sticking to the intention of the track. And Gennaro, and on and on and on. It's all in that thread.
Yeah, it's interesting to me to hear that it was done that long ago. It sounds recent to me. I was surprised just now when you said, "Oh, blah blah, it's 4 years old," because I figured it was something you just happened to have recently made that you were working on, and you said, "Oh, let me throw this in a competition."
No, I mean it's been around for a long time, and I think not all of the records, but most of the records on that EP, I would hope fall into that category. But we get stuck on these music fads a lot of times. Loudness is the current one that's been going on for the longest. Auto-tune and sidechaining are really just blips in comparison. But it takes away from the music. The same way why I sort of am opposed to left, center, right panning. It's because when it's not about the music, you've missed the point. And it's no disrespect to heavily compressed music. That's no disrespect to people who like an LCR approach. Those things do work. But it's not about that. And it never was. And actually, it's not even really about the recording quality in a lot of cases. And I know it's blasphemous for me to say that, but, Twist and Shout by the Beatles, Survivor by Bob Marley, those are pretty awful sounding records. They don't sound good, but they're timeless. The music's incredible.
I think a lot of people who attempt to mix live music have never heard live music. So they've heard live music on a record, which means they've heard it go through the preamps, they've heard it go through the consoles, they've heard it mastered, and they've heard it playing off their phonograph with scratches and yada yada. And I think they have this nostalgic thing where they try to emulate what they heard growing up versus what it would actually sound like if you were standing in front of a band listening to them. You have any opinions on that?
I think it comes down to more of the idea of emulation, and it goes back to a point that I was making earlier, which is, have a little guts and self-respect, actually. If you believe in your music, then you believe that your music doesn't have to subscribe to anyone else's aesthetic. You don't need to emulate a sound that already existed, and you don't need to emulate the sound now. Especially now, actually, the gatekeepers are no longer really the music industry capital guys. It's free for all, a lot more free for all now, and the record companies are no longer saying, well, it has to sound like this. What the record companies are saying is, well, is it selling? Because we could really use a hand.
Do you have an audience? Do you
have an audience? Because we're pretty much we fired all our A&Rs, so now we just don't know what to do anymore. But don't emulate. Emulate the things you like, but let your music be its own thing.
So you feel like an internet presence is important for mixers, or are you more a local, go door to door, hang out at the clubs or wherever they play music, meet people and get clients that way type of person?
Well, you know what the answer to that is already. It's both. It's got to be both, I think. The internet is a beautiful thing because I have an online presence, I can go anywhere and I will have a certain client base. I can go to LA, I can go to Minnesota, I can go to Miami, Atlanta, wherever I am, I can still get clients that way. Now, the reality is there's only so much you can do online. You can do a lot, but it's crazy. Like, it's so, like, I don't know how to Twitter really correctly, but it goes by so quickly. It's like, man, you got to be on that stuff, and it's like, I don't have the time or the patience really. So it's like, the old-fashioned way is good for a foundation. Go out, meet bands, find bands you want to work with. Like, I don't go up to bands that are just playing music. I'm going up to bands that I think are going to make me sound really good. let them do the work and I'll take the credit. You know? And that's how I've met some of my best clients, and being able to work with them face to face is really important too, because it broadens my understanding of the music. So it's got to be both in that regard.
So moving forward, what are your current career goals? Are you working with particular clients right now and working on particular projects? What's going on?
Yeah, well, like I've said, the success of my clients is my success. And so my future career is based on them succeeding. I think Dave actually said something very profound. He, in response to answering what a mixer's job is, he said, "My job is to make my clients a shitload of money."
There it is.
And he's right, actually. It's that. What he means by that is to do everything he can do to ensure his client's success. So there's a lot of really good stuff. Where to even start with that? To say one of the ones I'm most excited about is a guy named Maury Kane that I've been working with for a while. He's a jazz musician, and he's exceptional. And he ventures into electronica crossover, and I did a couple of things with him. I had always been involved with a lot of his projects, but I took the helm on a couple recently. One was a live concert that I mixed and Chris Athens mastered, and that came out, and that's been doing very well. And then another one was a series of recordings for the label that he's on up in New York, and I was involved in that project as the assistant engineer, and I guess I rubbed everyone the right way because they're really interested in working with me now.
Nice.
Yeah, and the head engineer on that was Ron St. Germain, and oh my goodness, that guy is an engineer for real. Like, that dude is a serious motherfucker. For anybody who doesn't know who he is, Michael Brower used to be his assistant. So Brower,
right?
Your man, you know what I mean?
Nice.
So that should tell you. But yeah, so now he's working on this like sort of funk R&B electronica thing that he's doing, and he wants me to assist him with the production as well as do the mixing, and I'm like super gassed about that because he's so creative and talented. I did a couple records with Dizzy Rascal, who's a grime MC from Britain, who's very, very well known outside of the States, and I'm really hoping that those songs come out. So I'm trying to figure out how to make that happen as much as an engineer can. One of my clients is Lady Gaga's former co-producer and DJ, a guy named Space Cowboy, and he hasn't been releasing a lot, but he's finally geared up to actually start releasing some EDM stuff, and I'm really pumped up about that. Illmind, he has a band named Smokey Robotic, which is Illmind is a rap producer, for those who don't know, who has done stuff with Kanye West and 50 Cent and all those camps. But he also produces a pop group called Smokey Robotic, and the music is really, really cool. So nice. Yeah, so I got a couple songs with them, and that will hopefully be coming out. And so a lot of these things, this is getting really long.
Hey, well, when you're doing a lot of work, there's a lot of stuff to say about it.
I mean, I'm excited about everybody's projects. There's so many people. Now I feel like I'm leaving people out, but there's just so many cool people that I'm working with, and I'm just really excited because they're so talented, and I feel like talent is the backbone of this entire industry, and that they're going to be successful, and so I'm going to be successful.
Sure.
I guess other than that, career goal-wise, I'd like to be out in L.A. I don't know if that's necessarily the place for me or not, but I've been in Philadelphia and New York for a long time, and I like it. But I think that there's an industry in LA in particular that has a lot to offer me. And I've been to other places, Atlanta and Miami, and I feel that the industry there is there. It's ready for me. If I moved to Miami, I'd have a job the next day in a studio, and that's awesome. But I don't know if that's necessarily what I need right now.
Sure.
What I need to do is take a chance and go somewhere where I'm not welcome yet, and try and see what I can do there. And I think LA is the place for that, for me right now.
Well, I think that LA is the place for that for everybody. It's everybody. Like, Dave has a story. I mean, it's not a story, I guess it's what happened. But he has a story about how he decided on one particular day he was going to Los Angeles. And that day he got in his car and drove out there, and he scrounged around and did what he had to do until he got on. And, otherwise, history wouldn't have been made.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't have been, So, and that's the thing, you have to feel out your environment. I mean, there's only so much you can do in any environment. I mean, as great of a music location as Philly may be, or as New York may be, Los Angeles has had the monopoly on it really for a long time, and I can't see that changing.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of cities where there's a lot going on. Austin is becoming pretty popular as
well.
well.
Right, South by, yeah.
Not just South by, but Austin's been a fantastic place for live music for a long time, and that's how Nashville started. Nashville was a live music place.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, and it takes years to develop, but 20 years from now, Austin is going to be a huge music hub. I foresee it. And Chris ain't stupid. Chris Athens is out there now.
Right, he's already there. Hey, give me business. Come on in.
Exactly. He's no fool. That man is very, very sharp, and he's happening. So you can go to Nashville, and there's music in Nashville. Now but every place is different. The skill set required to be successful in Nashville is not a skill set that I possess to the level that would be required of me, and moreover, LA is a better fit. You can't just go to LA because it's got music there. You've got music in New York, you've got it in Miami, you've got it in Atlanta, you've got it in Nashville, you've got it in LA. All of those, you can easily make a career as a musician if you've got the talent and the go-get-'em attitude. It's just got to be the right. It's got to be the right fit for you, which is why I travel to these places. LA is good for me because the focus on things like pre-production, musicianship, and constructed tracks in the world of pop is something that I can fit myself into. And also, there's a lot of film in LA, and I actually started out in film. So having that cross-section allows me to navigate those channels in a more effective way. Nashville, man, if you're not a monster on a tape machine, if you're not a beast on a console, and I'm not talking about like good, because I can do those things, but I'm not a beast. Not yet. If you're a beast on those things, go to Nashville, you'll have a job. If you're not, someone's already got the job. If I wanted to work on trap music all day, every day, I would be the king of Miami.
There it is. That's what's up. All right, let's talk equipment for a minute.
Yeah.
I'll name something, and you give me your favorite plug-in and your favorite outboard gear.
No one has ever done this before.
I know. This is really original, so pay attention, people. All right, here we go. Lead vocals.
Lead vocals... Search and Destroy with a digital EQ Q10, brighten it up, bring the pop in with a Tube Tech EQ P1A.
For both plugins out and outboard?
Oh, that was the first one was a plug-in, the second one was outboard.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Bass.
Track it through something with a transformer, like an LA2A or an 1176. Plug-in wise, multi-band compression, Wave C6.
Really? Multi-band. How does that help you on bass?
Well, the way it sits against... Keep in mind I'm doing a lot of pop music, so I should start by saying that.
Okay.
The way the mid-range attack and release is happening has to function one way in the track, and the way the low end is attacking and releasing kind of has to function a different way depending on what the kick is doing. So a lot of times I want to get at that stuff independently.
Okay. Kick as far as rap.
Well, the kick in rap has to be freaking big. Plug-in wise, R-bass. You can have a perfect kick, and R-bass will just make it a little more perfect. Outboard, I like to use an 1176 because I like the little texture, the distortion and texture, and the speed of it can really help you control that attack and release. But a lot of times, actually, I'm not really using any compression on a hip-hop kick.
Okay. Have you tried low ender?
No, I've never used low ender.
Yeah, you should check out. It's by Refuse, R-E-F-U-S-E, Refuse or Refuse or however they call themselves.
Is it going to make me retire R-bass?
No, 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 it's not. Actually, what it does is our bass, like let's say your signal is here, our bass goes higher and and low ender goes lower. So it gets you sub bass based on your signal. So like for instance in Gold on the Ceiling by
Hmm.
Black Keys,
Yeah, Tom
that's what
Elmhurst.
they use. Yeah, Chad Blake used that.
Uh,
Yeah, that's where that came from, is low ender. But that's
okay, because I love the bass on that song, man. The
yeah,
low.
man.
It,
I'll link you to it. There's
please do.
an interview with him on the low ender site where he's talking about that. But
Oh,
yeah,
that was
that's
Chad Blake. I thought that was Elmhurst who did that one. But
no,
it was Chad Blake. Okay.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, low ender. That's. But it's different because our bass and max bass go higher,
Yeah.
and yeah, low ender just goes lower, and low air. I don't really know where that sits, but
Never used it.
yeah, but yeah, you're gonna want to check out low ender. But
Cool.
let's see, kick as far as rock.
A limiter. So the different limiters sound different, but I think the Sony Oxford limiter is probably my favorite because of that enhancement thing. You want that good tick in the kick as well. It's not just about the low end presence. EQ wise, I have something called, it's not well known, but it's a company called Philtech, an MK3A, and Philtech was the company that owned Neve before Neve owned Neve, if
Nice.
that makes sense. It was a Siemens subsidiary. That it's like it's like SSL meets Neve in all the right ways, and just sounds awesome on Rock Kick. And the value of it just went up through the roof.
Right, right. Buy stock now. Buy stock now. All right. Snare.
Uh, clipping, clipping. Or we're talking about hip hop, pop.
That's a good question. I was not thinking hip hop snare since they're all fabricated anyway. Let's do both. Let's do hip hop snare.
Okay, so hard limiting when needed. I'll use my DBX 160 SL, the limiter mode on it. And also, I might clip it a little bit on the way back in if I need that impact hard clipping on the converters. For a rock snare, I would be looking at a softer kind of clipping mechanism like Decapitator, which is a plugin.
And decap you would use as an insert using the wet dry, or you would use it in parallel.
Usually 100% wet and
Really?
just
Okay.
driving it a little bit. Yeah.
100% wet decapitator on a snare.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. Acoustic guitar.
Uh, plugin wise, I think the coolest EQ for an acoustic guitar, it's gonna blow your mind. Filter Freak.
Yeah, that's right. I'll need a little explanation on that.
I'll give you that one. With acoustic guitar outboard, if I'll use my tube compressor, which is a Drummer 1968, but I would feel comfortable using the Pendulum OCL or really anything that's got a good glossy tube sound to it to make it sort of shiny and pretty. So those are my choices. With Filter Freak, I use Filter Freak generally as an effects processor because it's really cool. You can do all sorts of cool time-based filter modulations and things like that. But I was experimenting with it one day, and I just went into the basic function of it, and I said, how does this work as a notch filter? Really well, as it turns
Okay.
out. It's a very cool notch filter, and it does something really magical with acoustic guitars.
Very interesting. Electric guitar.
Boy, the electric guitar is choose the right guitar at the tracking. For the love of God.
The right amp, the right mic.
Yeah, I'm going to sort of answer this one a little differently, actually, because electric guitars, I tend to sort of, I'll use something like Echo Boy to give them a little echo if they need it, or I'll EQ out any kind of EQ almost, a little bit of mid-range to make them sound a little bit bigger. But the tracking is what's important with electric guitars, and so here's my golden gem for this one. if you are tracking electric guitars and you want them to be very, very thick and heavy, when you do the doubles, do one double using a full range capture, using either a 121, which is a ribbon microphone, or an 87, or a 67, or an SM57 even, or a large diaphragm dynamic. On any of the usual suspects to get the primary capture. When you double it, grab something like a Bayer M88 or something along those lines, an M300, which is a ribbon microphone that has a much more nasal sound, and tilt it away, tilt it off axis, so you're really only getting the nose of the guitar. The blending of those two is what allows you to get something that is very full sounding, because it gives you all the primary content of the guitar, but at the same time, it's not so full sounding that it's stepping on things, because it's not giving you the extra content. When people get the fullest capture that they can, they find that it starts stepping all over everything else. And so they have to dial it back, and you end up with guitars that are just never as rich.
Right, because if you do a double full on both sides, it blends into the midsection.
Right, exactly. You end up getting excess content that you don't really need, and then once it's in there, you can't really quite get it out the same way, not without making little sacrifices.
Okay, in addition to that, electric guitar, do you use a reverb or delay on it? Or none, I mean.
It really depends on the context. I find a lot of times I'll use a little bit of both, depending on what I'm trying to do. A spring reverb inside the actual track can be cool, especially if it's just subtle, to give it a little bit of instant depth there. Pairing a delay with a reverb to sort of create this concert feel is an approach that I like to use a lot. And if I'm in the right studio for it, then I'll use room mics and get my epicness from that. That's preferable, really, in most cases.
And spring verb in mono or stereo, and on the same side as the guitar, or panned opposite?
Well, that kind of depends on the arrangement, but I would say if you've got a lot of guitar doubles, keep your spring reverb mono, put it to the same side, and use it just to be a part of the guitar sound. If you really only have like one guitar and you kind of want to spread it out a little bit, maybe put the reverb in the center and put the guitar off to the right or the left, just to give it a little bit of breadth.
Okay, actually, now we're stuck on guitars. So you were talking about comb filtering earlier when we were talking about vocals. Is that an issue when, let's say you had one guitar and you make it mono, but then you use some kind of spreader program to make it seem like stereo?
I almost never do that on guitars. I save those kinds of tricks for stuff that I don't care about, basically.
Okay.
Because, I said this on the Yo-Mind interview, but I think it warrants reiterating. When mono compatibility doesn't just apply to mono playback systems, it also applies to when your speakers are not placed optimally. So, if, for example, you have a home theater system that you're listening on and you're far away from it, the speakers are relatively closer together. Well, they're essentially becoming more mono. So or laptop speakers, when you're playing something out your laptop speakers and you're on the other side of the room, if you're a college kid in your dorm and you're playing out your computer speakers or whatever, it's mono. And so if it's not mono compatible, then it's not going to translate as well.
All right. EDM synth, as far as the actual synth to be used.
As far as the actual synth to be used?
Yeah, like which program would you prefer to use as far as creating synth sounds?
Man, this is such a stereotypical answer, but I think the coolest one is Sylenth. That thing sounds so cool, man.
How about EDM synth processing?
Processing, well, mostly digital. Not as much hardware on the lead synths. I'll use a URS Fulltech, which is a software emulation of a Pultec. Okay. But I think there's also the Jack Joseph Puig which is supposed to be really good, and T-Rex has one too.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I don't think it really. They're all good. So whichever one. The key is to, if it's a really like EDM synth where there's like tons of top end, attenuate from the 20 kilohertz range and back it off until it no longer makes you want to kill yourself.
Okay.
And then, well,
yeah.
Remember, you're going to be with EDM. It's going into a club where everyone's compressing the shit out of their music. So the only way to get it to work is if you competitively meet that. You don't have control over the playback volume, so it's the one area where the loudness thing kind of does matter. Okay. So when you start compressing something that's got that much high end to it, it starts to sound like hiss. So you got to get rid of some of that, and that's take out some of that 20K, and then from the 10K or 8K or something in the treble range, wherever it seems to work best, boost on the same EQ. So you reestablish the brightness that your ear kind of hears as part of the music, and you get rid of the brightness that just sounds like white noise.
Cool. Strings.
Live or synth?
Strings live.
I have a really cool technique for recording string ensemble in particular, where you use 2 directional microphones and then 1 omni microphone to capture something that's going to be both stereo and mono at the same time. Choice microphones are M149 for the center capture, and then either actually C414s. I know that sounds crazy, like a lot of people would be, but given enough space, they actually sound really good, and you can stick them into hypercardioid mode, and they really pick it up nicely as your stereo pair spaced out. In the mix, as little as possible. If the strings are captured really well, it almost like, I guess the only thing that I would be careful of with those and that I would treat is sometimes the harmonic content in strings gets really aggressive. They're just very harmonically dense instruments, and so I might notch out a little bit of stuff in the upper mid-range just to kind of let them breathe a little. Waves Q10.
Okay. 2-bus.
I'm mostly hardware. It's not because there isn't great software out there. It's just my preference. My chain is almost always Drummer 1968 to the Clariphonic, and oftentimes with actually, I use a $400 graphic equalizer on 2-bus very frequently. BSS FC S960, and it sounds great. And then limiting, I'll probably use the Slate Digital FGX.
Okay, and that's if you're doing your own mastering, or you'll use FGX even if you're sending it to mastering?
Actually, I'll use it even if I'm sending it to mastering. I might not use the limiter section, but I might engage the transient section in there. I think the transient section's pretty cool on that one. But yeah, no, I don't limit when really if I'm sending it out to mastering, I might even leave the 2-bus completely blank.
Okay.
I should talk to some of the mastering engineers. Really, actually, no, I should just talk to Chris about it.
What do you want me to send you? All right.
Right, exactly. And he's going to say the same thing. He just says it doesn't matter.
Cool. And harmonica.
Harmonica. Shure SM58. Or there's actually... Hold on a second. Let me go get my harmonica microphone.
Oh, here we go.
This guy. This is... I can't remember... I never forget... Or I never remember what this guy is. But I use this on harmonica. And it's a ND468. It sort of was a short-run EV microphone. And right up against it. And then Waves Q10 and a whole shitload of it.
Very cool. All right, so as Herb loves to say, oh, you knocked them all out of the park and blah, 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 you're the best guest since whenever. But I think this has been a real good conversation. Good luck with the upcoming tutorial series.
Thank you. And
we'll catch up as we normally do on Pensado Students on Facebook. Shout out to all the fellas and gals over there. Any shout outs you want to make?
hell no.
That concludes our broadcast day.
I'm on there like every day, man. You know, I say hi to everyone.
All right, so good conversation, Matt. If people want to find you on the net, where can they reach out?
You can't. I'm hiding.
Dun, 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 dun.
You can find me. You can find me on my website, www.weiss-sound.com. I have a Twitter. I don't use it much, but I have it. It's at Weiss Sound without the dash. You can find my Facebook thing, which is Weiss-Sound on Facebook. I'm on Gear Sluts all the time. You can my phone number's on my website. You can probably call me, but just do it at reasonable hours.
Good deal. All right, man. Good chatting, and we'll catch up soon.
Yeah, man. Thanks for chatting it up with me. I love nerd talking. So.
No doubt. Yeah.
And I love being the center of attention. This is like the best of both worlds simultaneously.
All right, man. Good luck with all those projects coming up, and we'll catch up with everybody soon. Peace.
Peace.